Welcome to Basic Folk. I'm Cindy Howes. Another exciting episode of Basic Folk. Actually, very excited about my guest this week. Basic Folk is an interview podcast featuring conversations, authentic, honest conversations with folk musicians that fly under the radar or not for you. I am very pleased to have Kaia Kater on the show today. Kaia is a Canadian clawhammer banjo player who just released a new album this past October. The record is called Grenades, and she's very smart. I know I say that about every one of my guests. All of these people are so smart, but Kaia is very smart, and also I really appreciate the fact that she was so open to my questions about race. Kaia is biracial, and it comes up a lot in her life and part of her identity. And this record actually is about kind of trying to find pieces of her identity. The record Grenades. I'm going to play a song from the album. I really love this record, and it's hard to choose which song to play. But I want to play one that features her singing and then also her banjo playing, because there's some tracks on this record, Grenades, from Kaia Kater, that are very like Hammond organ sounding. But she's such an amazing banjo player that I wanted us to check out this song, Heavenly Track. And then we'll get to our conversation with the super nice and super smart and super great Kaia Kater on Basic Folk.
You got saved at the hip, washed in suds and light, broke bread at the halfway house, laid out to the side. I know you, ain't I seen you before? I felt you on the ceiling, and I felt you on the floor. Ooh, on the heavenly chair. Ooh, on the heavenly chair. Ooh, on the heavenly chair. To the sun, the sun, the sun. This land is bare as the palm of your hand. Its fingers at the collars and the coattails of the band. You know me, ain't I soothed you before? I'm the comfort of the stranger in the writings on the star, on the star. Ooh, on the
Kaia Kater, thanks so much for talking. It's so great to see you.
Good to see you too, Cindy. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So you were born in Montreal and raised there. Your family had a really strong connection to folk music in a couple different ways. Your grandfather, is he still around?
He is. Yeah.
Okay. Is he still a luthier?
He is. He's 72 now, so he's slowing down a little bit. But yeah, he's been a luthier his whole life. He originally went to school for architecture in Montreal, just totally hated it, but still loved kind of figuring out problems, like mathematical problems and woodworking and stuff like that. So he actually managed to convince the dean of McGill University, which was where he was going at the time. He managed to convince the dean to let him do this kind of odd luthier degree. And he did a lot of independent study, and he was making a lot of harpsichords for most of his life in the early 70s and through to the 80s. And then
He was making harpsichords?
Harpsichords, yeah.
Do you know how to play one?
I mean, I used to mess around with them in his workshop, but I always found the sound to be not as like attractive as the piano, which was like more emotive to me. Me and the harpsichord never really got on the same wavelength, but there's still time.
Super goth sound
yeah.
to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So your mom runs, does she still run a few folk festivals in Canada?
No, she ran the Ottawa Folk Festival from 2007 through to 2008, so she was 2 years with them. And then she ran the Winnipeg Folk Festival from 2009 to 2011, so she was 3 years with them. And then she kind of moved into, she worked for a national folk organization called Folk Music Canada. And now she's just sort of getting into like grant writing and kind of working for herself, which I think she's really enjoying.
That's awesome. And
Yeah.
she is also a musician?
She's a great, I think she's a great guitar player and singer. And she used to learn songs to help me sleep. So she would like learn some Joni Mitchell songs and some Jewel songs. And that was like one of my favorite parts of my childhood. But she doesn't play music in public, and her whole motto, like her life kind of ethos, is if you can't make music happen. So
I love it.
Yeah, so that's kind of the thing, and yeah, and I actually really like that because I feel like with that kind of attitude, like that kind of presence in her life, I like through her I've been able to meet a lot of really cool people, and I feel like some of like those values that I grew up with are still there with both of us. So,
and you were talking about how you weren't attracted to the harpsichord sound, but a sound that really did appeal to you, of course, was the banjo. Can you talk about that a little bit? How, like, what was appealing to you about that sound?
Yeah, that is funny. I kind of felt that when I was talking about that. I was like, oh, I didn't like the plucky sound of the harpsichord, but then I picked the banjo, which is like a hilarious U-turn. Yeah, I mean, I think I was attracted to how weird the banjo was, like how strange it was, and I don't think I really had words to describe that when I was learning it. I really fell in love with the clawhammer style of playing the banjo, which to me is a little bit softer, kind of a little bit more tender, which I really liked. You know, I was around a lot of music as a kid, and I saw a lot of banjos, and so when I pointed to it and was like, I want to play that, there was like, you know, there was a means to like get me an instrument and like figure out a way for me to get lessons, you know? And I think my mom was like, she like definitely was like, yeah, you can do whatever you want. And I did some sports, but I think maybe she was secretly hoping that I would like return to the fold and like choose a folk instrument. And then, so anyway, she was super stoked when I picked the banjo.
That's awesome. Can you explain the clawhammer banjo style a little bit?
Yeah, so it's an older, slightly more percussive way of playing the banjo. Usually, well, there are all sorts of banjo styles, but the most common in American roots music are Scruggs style, which a lot of your listeners might have heard Scruggs style played in bluegrass. It's pretty virtuosic. It's played really fast in what they call banjo rolls, essentially. And the
like Foggy Mountain Breakdown.
Exactly, yeah. And clawhammer banjo is the kind of like the grandmother to that style. So the clawhammer banjo was played a lot by early Appalachian settlers, and also by a lot of African American enslaved peoples who had brought over the banjo through the transatlantic slave trade, because the banjo actually has its roots in West Africa. So it was, you know, we kind of assume that it was brought over during the transatlantic slave trade, and that a lot of Black people played it. Through and for many reasons, the banjo has kind of been blanched or like whiteified and countrified, but it's actually an instrument that has like a really complicated, I would say complex history.
The complex history of the banjo, was that kind of a reason I read that you were pretty secretive about being a banjo player in high school?
Yeah, I didn't really tell anyone. Just because I didn't want to be bothered with this stigma. And, in high school, you were just concerned with fitting in and getting through. And I started playing it. I remember the moment that I started playing it was when a friend of mine who was a guitar player, she's a really good guitar player, and now has since taken up the clawhammer banjo and is really great. But, she was my first friend at that high school, and I transferred in the middle of grade 10 to Winnipeg in January, which was like...
Perfect timing.
Yeah, just...
Right in the middle of high school.
Yeah, just an amazing, amazing time. Anyway, so she was the first friend that I made, and over the next, year, we started talking about... I told her that I played, and so I would go over and jam with her, and around that time, that Mumford & Sons record came out. I can't remember what it's called, but it blew up, among our, generation of people.
And then you rose like a phoenix out of the ashes. You're like, look at me, everyone.
Yeah, I was like, I've been playing it this whole time, and now I'm, really good at it.
What was people's reaction when you were like, look at me? I mean, you're not really like a look at me type of person, but when you're like, hey, I actually play the banjo.
Yeah, well, I played it at we had a thing called the Kelvin. I went to Kelvin High School, which is actually the same high school that Neil Young went to. Fun fact. But yeah, so I did their coffee shop thing, and we played a White Stripes song called, I think it's I Can Tell That We're Gonna Be Friends, with my friend who's a guitarist, and then I played just a solo banjo tune. And at the end, people were so into it. And I felt like that was just me coming out as a banjo player, and this I was I don't know, people probably think it's weird, but people were super into it. And then I became known through the school as yeah, she plays the banjo. I think it was cool. I don't know. It was a hipster kind of cool, probably.
I want to hear the stories behind when you were first coming to the clawhammer banjo at these folk festivals that your mom would run. You had kind of VIP all access to these incredible clawhammer banjo players, and you would ask them for lessons.
Yeah, they were really generous with their time. Now being a touring musician and being exhausted at festivals, I can tell that it was it was a lot for them to accept a request from a kid for a lesson, and it was really nice of them to be so gracious about it.
I want to know a little bit more about your experience with Rhiannon Giddens. You got one lesson from her. What was it like for both of you in that experience? Because I'm sure she doesn't come across a lot of young people of color, and specifically women of color, who are interested in folk music and the banjo.
Yeah. I think she was pretty stoked. I mean, I'm just trying to think of her at that time. She's probably around my age, the age I am now, or a bit younger, and the Carolina Chocolate Drops had blown up. And when I think about how excited and kind of weepy I get when I see young Black women or women of color interested in folk music, I'm getting weepy about it now. I'm just I'll give anything you need. I'll support you. Yeah, and I've had a few of those opportunities now to interact with youth who are just stoked and a lot of youth are looking for ways to express themselves, and sometimes just need an instrument or just need you to show them a few things. So yeah, she was really supportive and has been really supportive since of my career. Obviously, she's gone on to do really incredible things, and in a lot of ways, her and the Chocolate Drops did a lot of work, a lot of road mapping in terms of how can a person of color who plays these types of instruments have a successful and fruitful career. They were kind of the first people, in my view, the first people of my kind of generation to do that.
Yeah. So growing up, aside from the influence of folk and traditional music, you were listening to a lot of hip hop, maybe more than folk music.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
And you got a lot of this music from your dad, music that he thought you should listen to, and you definitely took to it. I'm interested why you were still drawn to play folk music, even though you were listening to mostly rap music growing up. And do you think that rap informed who you are as a musician?
Yeah, absolutely. And I should clarify that do you remember those MP3 discs where that first came out where you could put like 200 songs on a disc? So he would send me like a bunch of those. That's what I felt was like a real hip hop like an education in hip hop. And my mom also, to her credit, like she gave me a Fugees album on my like 11th birthday. And so I think both of them were trying to be really conscious of like helping me access like music that wasn't strictly white, like considered white music, you know? Yeah, and I don't know why I kept playing folk music. I think probably there was a curiosity that wasn't limited to any particular genre. So I didn't feel an alliance to any particular genre, which was helpful at that time. Also, I learned a lot, I learned so much history in hip hop and in rap music, and it was also an education in poetry and in lyrical prose. There was just so much that I was trying to absorb at that time from musicians that I felt were so incredible. And I think I was getting a lot of like my technical influence from old time music and from folk music, but I was getting a lot of my lyrical influence from hip hop and rap.
When you went to West Virginia, you went to college there and you really got a chance to study the art of Appalachian music. And I read that you were kind of recruited like a football player because you were an all-star Canadian banjo superstar.
Yeah, I mean that's how I introduce myself, like at parties. So thank you for giving me that title.
Yep.
Yeah, I was, I was a kid. I was like 18, and I'd graduated high school and didn't know what I wanted to do, and was kind of struggling and was waitressing and playing music on the side, and I had applied to a summer program similar to similar to Miles of Music camp, which we have both attended, that happens on an island in New Hampshire. It was just like a way to attend an intensive, and this intensive happened to be through an organization that took its residence on a college campus in West Virginia. So unbeknownst to me, I had submitted my application. This was early 2012. I submitted it, didn't really hear back, figured, well, maybe I didn't make the cut, and kind of forgot about it. And unbeknownst to me, the college, along with the organization, which was called Augusta Heritage Center, had partnered together, and the college had agreed to provide the funds to have more young string band musicians come down. And the deal was that we could get an education and get a degree in whatever we wanted, while also being contracted to a certain amount of performances with the string band and clogging team to represent the school. So it was kind of like it was like a sports team. Anyway, I got a call in May of that year, and I went down. It was kind of unbelievable, but it was all legit, and I went down with my family, and we checked out the campus, and I was enrolled by August. Yeah.
It's so strange to hear that even on the drive down there, you're like, well, I don't know if this is real.
Yeah.
And then it was. So do you actually have a degree, like, not in banjo?
No, so I think it's a lot of, it's good that you asked because there's like a lot of confusion about that. People are like, you went to study music, but you didn't get a B Muse, like you didn't get a Bachelor of Music. So I got really into, religion and philosophy. And so it was like crazy because, I don't have a religious family. My family are pretty a-religious. And I hadn't given a second thought to religion other than it was a divisive, kind of scary entity. Mm-hmm. And I took a world religions class in my first semester at the school, which was just a gen ed credit. And I totally fell in love with it. And it was kind of this moment where I was like, yeah, this is absolutely what I want to do. And originally I thought I was going to study Appalachian music and history. But the degree hadn't quite formed there and it was kind of nebulous. And there was just this other path that seemed so attractive to me. And is still really like attractive to me. Like I feel like if I ever stopped playing music, like I would just go to school for philosophy and religion, So yeah, that's what I did. I got a degree in that.
What's your favorite religion?
What's my favorite religion? That's funny. I really like am really interested by Sufism, which is like a mystical kind of religious aspect of Islam. And Sufis are they have in their tradition, like if your listeners know like what whirling dervishes are, which is just these people, usually men, that like spin and spin and spin. If you've ever seen a whirling dervish, it's supposed to be this kind of I'm not exactly sure what it's supposed to represent, but I think it's just supposed to represent like just like your commitment to the infinite or something, or like you getting past your earthly thoughts and just spinning. Yeah, but it's really cool to go, like if you look them up on YouTube and watch them. But yeah, it's a really interesting sect, and it's actually the minority sect. So there's Sunni Muslims, Shia Muslims, and Sufis, and they're kind of a minority, but it's a really interesting faction of Islam.
I want to take some time to talk about your voice. Your voice has so much emotion in it, and I think you use it in really interesting ways. What is your relationship with your singing voice, and how did you learn to sing?
That's a really good question. For a long time, my family sings. We used to get together during Boxing Day, which I don't think Americans have really, if they call it that, but it's just the day after Christmas.
Where you wear those hats.
Yeah, where you wear the hats. Yeah. Yeah, good knowledge. Anyway, we used to have these kitchen jams, and everybody would sing, and like even if you weren't playing an instrument, you would sing along, and it would just be like 2.5 hours of like everything from like Joni Mitchell and Neil Young to like old gospel songs, so like like By the Mark and stuff like that. So I always remember singing. I never thought I had a good voice though. And I went to college. Do you think
you have a good voice now?
Yeah, I do. I think, I don't know if it's as much I didn't have a good voice then and I do have a good voice now. I don't think it's that binary, but it's maybe the fact that like I am learning every day how to use my voice in a more safe and also emotive way, into how to like grow my voice. My voice really, in my range, especially my low range, increased like crazy when I was in college, because I was singing a lot in college, and it was the first time that I had a singing teacher. My teacher, Emily Miller, who's she's part of the Starry Mountain Singers, and she's just an incredible vocalist. Anyway, so she was a huge influence on me, and we did a lot of singing. And that was, through college. I mean, my banjo playing got better, but my singing just really changed. And probably also because I was still growing and, like, developing as a human physically. It's kind of interesting, like, just to see what it's done. And it almost feels like its own thing, like, separate from me,
In my experience, and I believe also in your experience as well, but I'm going to let you answer this question. I see the world that we're in, this folk and Americana world, as a very white place. And I read this incredible interview you did with Amara Thomas in The Fader, who is also a woman of color. So, like, my heart was literally in my throat reading about your experience. And, like, your audiences are mostly white, privileged people. Yeah. That seems like it is a struggle for you. So in the interview, you said, I would love to get away from a space where I only perform for the majority of whom I feel are privileged white people. I want to be able to collaborate and access spaces that are more cathartic for me. So I'm interested in, like, how you're feeling about that particular aspect of it these days, and if there are some ways you're working towards more cathartic spaces for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know. It's a question mark for me. I've come to this realization that, I don't know if I'm ever gonna find that, and I also don't know if that is the answer. So there are a few things. First of all, I feel, like, and this may put off a lot of people, but I don't care. I don't want to play bluegrass festivals anymore for the most part, because I have a lot of, there's this element of nostalgia, not at all bluegrass festivals, and there's one that I love that I grew up going to, called Gray Fox, that I played this summer, and I had a great time. And
where is that?
It's in Oak Hill, New York. Okay. But there are bluegrass festivals. There's a specific bluegrass festival that I played recently that, I drove onto the grounds and it was just littered with Confederate flags, and I was playing, and I was about to go on stage and play for this audience that, much of whom probably, do not have conscious racial bias. But that almost doesn't matter, I have thought about, rather than spaces that are cathartic for me, which I think will take a long time to carve out, I have decided to start avoiding places that are actively erasing, I guess, like, my presence, or even the, like, proverbial presence of Black people, or the history of America specifically. So, or the places that are antagonizing. So that's been a step that I've decided to take. And I think just really being honest at my shows. I have this thing I do, which is kind of funny and terrible, but I kind of I trap people. So my first set, if I do a 2-set show, my first set in a new place, my first set will be, like, will have no mention of race. And then at the intermission, people buy my record and they're super into it. And then in the second set, I start to get, like, really heavy and intense and, like, kind of don't give a you-know-what about people's comfort. And so I talk about it really honestly. And that's usually the time when I'll get, like, when people will be bothered or people will leave or whatever. And it's like, well, I've already gotten your money, so joke's on you. Like, yeah. And I think it's just about, I think the catharsis happens, when, I feel strong enough and good enough to talk about race on stage, and when people don't run. I don't think it's about getting, like, now I don't think it's about getting away from white people, but rather just being able to be honest with white people and appreciating the people who stay and who listen. And ideally I would love to branch out to more audiences with people of color, and it's something that I'm actively trying to do. And I think it's just something that will come with time, and I always appreciate the people of color that come into my shows. I did a show in New Jersey once, and there was a guy who came into the room and realized that it was all white people, and that's triggering for a lot of people of color. So he had to go back to his car and, like, really think about whether he wanted to come back in. But he did come back in, and he did see the show, and he did buy a CD, and I'm just hoping to, like, if people of color are willing to come to my shows, like, I will make it a space where you feel seen and you feel heard, and that's, and in the same way, I'm trying to play in spaces and in places where I feel seen and I feel heard. And I feel like that's kind of, that's essentially the like ecosystem that I'm trying to create, which means, not playing festivals where that isn't at least an effort, a clear effort,
Right. So smart. This might seem like trite going from that topic to this topic, but I think it kind of ties in, maybe. Could be wrong. The hairstyles that you featured in your promo shots over the years are really striking. What is your relationship to your hair, and do you style your hair in an intentional way aside from looking like really cool? Is there a deeper meaning to it?
Oh, that's a good question, Cindy. I've never gotten that question. That's a great question. Yeah, hair is a huge part. It's such a huge part of my life, in my day, in my entire existence, like it is for many Black women. There was a lot of conversation. My hair is natural in the picture on 9pin, and for your listeners, my hair is cornrowed and then kind of styled into like a cool like dinosaur kind of looking like a bump kind of thing. And I loved it. Because I felt like it was unapologetically me. And then for this record that I've just put out, Grenades, my hair was also natural in the picture, and there was a huge discussion with my hairdresser. Originally I'd asked for braids and extensions, and I wanted it to be super fancy, and she just looked at me and it was like, you should just wear your hair natural. You should just be who you are, So yeah, so it's definitely a hair evolution, I think, can be seen in my records, and yeah, I'm always trying to get better at taking care of my hair and styling my hair and avoiding those frustrating moments where I want to like cut it all off, like shave it off. Yeah, thank you for asking that though. It's a great question.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm also, if I could ask a little bit more questions about your hair, who taught you how to style your hair and how to work with your hair?
Yeah.
Because it sounds like your mom is white.
Yeah.
And your dad lives separately from you.
Yeah. So this was a hard thing. Like, my mom actually did, for someone who didn't have YouTube and didn't have like a forum of like white moms, like, or like talking about how to style biracial hair, like, she did a really good job. It was when I started taking care of my own hair, I think that kind of fell off, I think she was maybe hesitant to try and tell me what to do because, we're different races, and, I was kind of like a teenager when I started taking care of my own hair, so I think she kind of left me alone for that reason. And when I would see my dad, he would just bring me to a hairdresser, to a hairstylist. So I kind of learned bits here and there from hairstylists. And then actually when I went to college, I had a lot more black friends, like black female friends. And they taught me a lot about how to style my hair. And it was usually like, I would be like, oh yeah, I wash my hair every few days. And then they look at me and be like, what? They'd be like, no, this is what you need to do with your hair. And like, they were really supportive and like would come over and like do my hair sometimes and stuff like that. And I actually have a close friend who is black and was raised by white parents. And she's a few years younger than I am, but she and I were in college at the same time and we're really close. But I saw her kind of go through a similar thing of just like how do you deal with your hair when you don't have black women in your life teaching you and helping you, so that's kind of like, that was kind of like a chasm, or like a place where, there was a lack of education for me and for her.
Your latest album, Grenades, named for Grenada. Your father's from Grenada, and he emigrated to Canada in the 70s or the 80s?
The 80s.
When you were growing up, it sounds like you would go kind of back and forth between Montreal and Grenada.
Montreal and Vancouver, which was where he was living and going to school.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when did you spend time in Grenada?
Oh, well, I spent time in Grenada. Actually, no, you're right. I spent time in Grenada like up until I was 6. We went back and forth a lot. And then it just kind of stopped. Like I think my parents both were really busy with just being, having careers in Canada. My dad went back sometimes, but not that much. So I mostly grew up with like childhood memories of Grenada, but then like not being all that interested in it, like just kind of being like, well, this is my life in Canada. But also it was interesting because there was a lot of loneliness there. I was an only child. I am an only child. I have a huge family there, but I didn't really know them. I think it was like kind of the classic thing of like being a child of an immigrant, of just kind of figuring out what your, like who you are essentially, like as a new Canadian, and I was pretty consumed with that for a long time. And it's recently that I have really wanted to reconnect with Grenada, have a continuing influence on my life,
How did you prepare for this album? Did you travel to Grenada with the intention of getting ready to reconnect in such a way of like making this record?
Yeah, I mean, I knew pretty much right away that I had to go. There was this kind of compulsive thing where I was like, okay, I really have to go. And I received funding from the Canada Council for the Arts, which are a great organization which help artists, just give grants to artists to do what they need to do in terms of research. So I got a grant. Yay! So I got a grant from the Canada Council, and I sublet my place here, and I went there for a month. And it was great. Like, there are a lot of things that, I expected to go there and to feel, when you're in I think when you have a hyphenated identity, there's a certain amount of loneliness that comes with that territory of feeling like you don't quite fit in anywhere. And my expectation was that I would go to Grenada and suddenly find the missing puzzle piece, the kind of like find yourself voyage. But I went there and I realized, no, I'm different. I'm Canadian. I have a lot of Canadian influences in my personality and in my identity. And so, yeah, it was just a cool way to get to know my family and also to feel more confident and okay with who I am rather than trying to assimilate myself, just to realize that, there's beauty and truth in being both, which is what my dad always said, but it was just kind of like, I just never listened.
Whatever, Dad.
Yeah, whatever. You don't know anything.
There are a couple of speaking interludes on the album that are super interesting, and I want to know more about them. Who is speaking? And it sounds like you included these to break up the different parts of the record.
Yeah, so it's an interview. It's my dad's voice. It was an interview that I had with him last Christmas. It is actually a 3-hour long interview, and I would love to turn it into a radio piece in some way. But for now, I just took those 3 excerpts because they're hugely influential to the album. And the interview that I did with him actually preceded any songwriting that I did. So it felt like that should be the rock or the center from which all the songs came from. Even if they weren't directly related, some of those emotional touchstones were really important to me. So I look at the album as 3 movements. The first is when he talked about his grandmother, my great-grandmother, and her revolutionary attitude. In that block of songs, there are a lot of songs about kind of female empowerment or the complex issues of just being a woman in general in this century. And then also the second interlude was about my dad, and the invasion of Grenada by U.S. forces in 1983. So what that was like. And then there are several songs that follow that are kind of in that theme. And then the last is about him deciding to stay in Canada. And that precedes one last song, which I consider to be the thesis of the album. So yeah.
That's cool. That's really cool. How did you record that interview?
We recorded in the basement of his apartment, and we just patted the doors with pillows and tried to make it sound as dead as possible. And we actually kept having to stop the interview because him and my stepmom, they have a cat, and the cat kept coming to the door and scratching. You could hear faint meows. So, but we got it all done. It was long, but
oh, cats. Do you want to talk about cats? No, let's not talk about.
No.
Let's be on the phone for another 2 hours. Wanted to talk about the imagery on the album, the album cover, and the liner notes, but mostly the pictures that you chose to include. When somebody Googles Grenada, it shows beautiful Caribbean beaches and this underwater sculptures and all this this paradise, but the pictures that you use on the record seem very real.
Yeah, you mean in the liner note section?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so those are actually photos that my mother took of the island with her Kodak disposable camera in 1997 when we were there. And she's been my mom, she's awesome. I was thinking about her, just to have a biracial kit, to just enter into that whole space. She's been really, really supportive and really helpful in me figuring out what my history is. And when I told her that this would kind of be the theme of the record, she went through her photos and basically got 12 or 15 photos that she took of the Caribbean, of Grenada specifically. And those felt like you're right. Those felt way more real and less kind of tourist inspired. And it felt like the Grenada that I met and the Grenada that I knew, which was local people and family and stuff. And so those are the photos that I chose to include.
That's really nice. I feel like that's something that like my mom would have done, and then she would have given me the pictures and I would have been like, "Oh, thanks." But it actually turned out really well.
Where are you from? Are you from Pittsburgh?
No, I'm from Massachusetts.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, outside of Boston. And if my mom is listening, I would totally use your pictures on my album.
Definitely, for sure.
Well, Kaia Kater, thank you so much for taking so much time and being so open and just a wonderful person in the world.
Thanks for having me, Cindy.
Okay, that's my conversation with Kaia Kater on Basic Folk, and I'm trying to like think of like something profound to say at the end of this, but the truth is that I am having a very hard time putting into words how I feel about the conversation I had with Kaia. I'm just so grateful that she was so open. This interview has sort of changed me, and hopefully it has helped you learn a thing or two about what it is like to be a person of color in the world, and specifically in a mostly like white music genre. And I keep trying to like get back to like having this profound statement, but I'm just really grateful. I am just so in awe of Kaia and her talent, and she's just an awesome person. Don't forget to check out her new album, Grenades. I have show notes on my website that you can check out at cindyhouse.net. I'll post her record up there and video. And thank you to Janelle Gutierrez, my website designer, who is super cool. Thank you to Alex Stanton for the music of Basic Folk. And thanks to my podcast apprentice, Laura McCarthy. And thank you, dear listener, for checking out Basic Folk. Please subscribe, leave a review. Oh yeah, you can get your in-home speakers, those speakers that you talk to, and they do what you say and answer your questions. You can get them to play Basic Folk as well. I have gotten one to play it, and it's very exciting. So there you are. We will see you next week. Or I will see you next week. I don't know who else is in this room. It's just me. I'll see you next week. Thanks for listening to Basic Folk. Bye.